I didn't recognize the voice on the phone, but I could recognize the death threat. It sent chills down my spine. My face immediately flushed red. And this wasn't when I was a member of Parliament, a public figure. This goes way back. I was a volunteer for a lesbian community library. And we had some books that were missing, and we had to find them. And we'd lost contact with the borrowers, so our plan was to publish the names of the borrowers in a small lesbian newsletter. Well, clearly, this woman was so scared to have her name published, she was prepared to threaten my life. That would break her moral code, I have no doubt, and it must have been extremely difficult for her. When I came out to my mother, she was visiting. She went home to California in the desert, and the only support that she could get was on the end of a national phone helpline. It was those days before the internet, before you could Google. It was the days when Ellen hadn't even come out on telly. You could lose your job, you could be bullied, you could be harassed, you could face violence in your own neighborhood. My mother, when she went home, started the first support group in her area for other parents and friends of lesbians and gays. So, my coming out benefited lots of people, and they got the support and acceptance that they needed. So let's talk about coming out. And not in the usual way that we might talk about coming out, but in a way that you're afraid of. Something that exposes you. Something that you're willing to stand up for. It could be sexual identity. It could be a political standpoint, like animal rights. It could be climate change, and we're going to get to that. It could be a point of view that you have that's slightly off the mainstream, but there's a cost to exposing this. I want you to think about a moment in your life when you came out, but there was some risk attached to it. Because I want you to think about the cost of avoiding that risk. Sometimes the cost is more. There's exposure. And because of that, people just let them happen, don't they? Let me take you to a moment in my life. I was surrounded by the noise of a busy city. I was in the middle of an intersection. The police horses powerfully stood. It seemed like within an arm's reach. I could smell their sweat. We were trying to be immobile, occupying the intersection. The police started gathering in number around us. We were there calling for urgent change. The oceans are rising, and so are we, we chanted. And it seemed like the city was listening in that moment. It was that day, that global action day, when the students called us on a global strike for climate action, and millions of people around the world were marching, and lots of people were arrested. Not me. I wasn't prepared to pay that cost yet. The floodwaters continue to rise. There's a cost to ignoring our cries. So I was blessed to become an MP, a member of Parliament. I introduced a bill to extend marriage rights to same-sex couples in our state It was 2012. We would have led the nation in marriage equality. Disappointingly, the major parties did not. So I think about the lesbian and gay members in the major parties, and how did they feel to be on that side, the wrong side of history, as we say? How did it feel for them not to stand up for something that they truly believed in, that they knew was right? It was a cost to me, that delay. 6 years later, national marriage equality was accepted. But the cost to me in that delay, my girlfriend had been diagnosed with early breast cancer. We managed to go overseas and get married in between her treatments. On the day it became legal to marry in this country, she passed away. That delay cost us. I was motivated to stand up and for compassion for animals because I live in a port city on the western edge of Australia, and millions of animals are trucked through the city, sent in ships from our port far across to distant seas for slaughter. There was a moment in time, I was in my car in the intersection, I looked across and I saw this sheep truck, and the stench was pungent. I looked over and I looked into the eye of a sheep that seemed to be caught between the slats trying to get some air, and I saw fear in her eyes. And I knew what was going to happen to her. That moment lit something in me. And as a result, because I knew what she was about to endure, I had to take action. So I joined with other people in my community, and we formed a campaign, and it grew into a national movement, which has now called for an end to live exports. And in fact, our government has heard that cry, and they're going to end live exports. I took a moment to think about all the exporters, all the captains of the ships of shame, all the people that worked on the trucks all those years, what they witnessed, what they knew about the suffering, and how they kept their silence, and the cost that it must have been to them. But let me tell you about one of the days when I felt the tide turn. Imagine the Beeliar wetlands, teeming with wildlife, one of the last remaining wetlands in our city. Bulldozers destroying it, cutting a path for a highway. On this day, the sun had been up for 1 hour. It was a hot day. I could feel the sweat trickling down the back of my neck from my sun hat. The dust in the air was thick. The footsteps of looked like hundreds of protesters had kicked up the sandy soil. I could hear their voices in the distance. We had come to push the bulldozers back. We had come to save the quendas, the skinks, the owls, the cockatoos, the ancient trees and bushes and flowers, the swamps, and the Aboriginal sacred places. Decades of campaigning, marches, protest marches, large and small, submissions, thousands of submissions, thousands of signatures on petitions, a court case or two could not stop this road. So hundreds of people were confronting the bulldozers day after day, trying to slow them down, trying to save this area. We'd had some wins, but much damage had occurred. On this day, hundreds of us lined the fence line. The cops, the police, they were on the end of the fence line, and they'd arrested the guitar player. But we continued to chant, and we pushed through the fence line, going into where the bulldozers were, and we held them firm. They did not move that day. Yes, there was a cost to the environment. You know, over the long campaigns of trying to save the environment, we've lost a lot. The long days, the hot, dusty protests, the feeling tired and hungry, it has come at a cost. But there is regrowth along the corridor where it's been replanted. And today, those wetlands are protected now and for future generations. And as you would know, though it came at a cost, it is now legal to marry the one you love in Australia if you're lesbian or gay. And the suffering of millions of animals will stop when the government finally fulfills its promise to end that trade. So, what greater cost is there than global extinction? I'm asking you to take that opportunity and find your purpose to come out. I think back on that voice on the phone, you know, the woman who was threatened. What kind of a life has she lived? Has she remained in the shadows and in fear all these years? And what if she had been able to live the life she was born to lead? What if she had become a confident lesbian, someone who is acting out their genuine purpose, someone who's contributing? What could she have contributed to our community and to the wider world if she'd had the courage just to be who she was? And what about you? It's not enough to just come out if you're a lesbian and gay person. It's not enough to develop mindfulness, to seek your inner wisdom, to find your passion, to practice gratitude. It's not enough. Because if your inner success doesn't lead to outer action, it's meaningless. So, the world needs you. What will you come out for? Thank you.